on Nick.
I'd like to welcome Maria. Previously worked for Canvas and currently works for Area.
Talk about MOOCs and why you might want to teach one today, because for me, teaching a MOOC was a really interesting exercise in collecting open educational resources that students can use for which is not the easiest thing to do, no matter how curated you try to make them. So the title of my talk is Teach a MOOC, What Are You Crazy? I do not have a business card, so if you want to get a hold of me, you'll just have to write down Busyness Girl, Google it, and you'll find me somewhere. It's my email address, my Twitter handle. So just a little bit about me. I work in the learning software industry. I taught in higher ed for 14 years. I taught Calc 1 and Calc 2 fully online for 5 years. I taught a social media MOOC for Canvas Network. And my PhD is in higher ed leadership, so I studied faculty in colleges and how they function as part of my PhD. So we're going to do a little quick standing poll to get some exercise since it's the afternoon. Everybody's tired. So stand up if you know what a MOOC is. Probably everybody heard the last session. Now, stay standing if you ever signed up for a MOOC. Okay? And stay standing if you ever went a step further and actually signed into the class and did something in the MOOC. Oops, still most of it. And stay standing if you completed at least 2 weeks of the MOOC. And stay standing if you completed at least one MOOC in its entirety. Great. Okay, so there you are. Those are statistics, about right. Maybe a little higher in this room than the average MOOC. Educators tend to be really morbidly curious about other people's classes and cannot resist the urge to sign up for somebody else's classes just to see how they teach it, right? I will be completely honest, the only MOOC I finished is the one I taught. Okay, so the difference between a SPOC and a MOOC, I taught mostly SPOCs when I was in education, small private online courses, and now we have MOOCs, massive open online courses. Two very different worlds pedagogically and technology-wise and everything else that you can think of. So I thought I would start with how I ended up teaching a MOOC, but we're going to do one more standing poll first. So I want you to stand up if you've ever taught an online course with at least 20 students in it. Okay, and then stay standing if you've ever taught an online course with at least 60 students in it. Where this is going, right? And stay standing if you've taught an online course with at least 200 students in it. At least 1,000 students in it. So we have like the last men and women standing here. So that we start to get into MOOC territory at that point, right? More than 1,000 students in an online class is a daunting challenge. What did you teach?
Me?
Yeah.
The Badges MOOC that just finished up.
Okay, so you taught a MOOC? Regular class or MOOC?
Regular Intro to American Government.
Ooh, that's going to be toughy. I hope you move. Which one?
The Open Badges MOOC.
Okay. So American Government, did you have to grade papers in that class?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. We should give them a hand. Yes, so thank you very much for standing again. That's the last standing poll for now. So how did I end up teaching a MOOC? Well, it went something like this. I went to work for Canvas, and I was thinking to myself, take all the student problems I have in a 60 people in my online calculus class, and just magnify it by like 100 or 1,000, and that didn't sound pleasant to me at all. I can imagine those of you who teach online courses have the same thoughts running through your head. So I think I said something like this: you couldn't pay me to teach calculus to 500 students online. And my CEO at the time, Josh, said, well, technically, I think I could. And then at some point along the way, I kind of volunteered, and because I was volunteering, I taught social media instead of calculus, which seemed like a much saner subject to me at the time. I think still it was, but I'm not sure. So the class I taught was a social media class through Canvas Network. I spent many months managing Canvas Network and the design of all the MOOCs for Canvas Network. So it was kind of like an exercise to like mock up all the stuff in my class, and then it kind of became a real class at some point along the way. So it was like the boiled frog method. So for the record, I volunteered. But what was interesting is that when I was done teaching the MOOC, I just thought, please don't make me go back. So it was a really profound experience and very life-changing in terms of the way you start to approach the pedagogy of how you teach, even if you were to go back to a traditional class, which I'm not going to do. You can't make me grade papers anymore. Okay, so anyways, so really teaching a MOOC was the purest form of teaching I ever did. I taught for 14 years in higher ed, And it was definitely the best experience in terms of the students being interested in what I was teaching and genuine about what they wanted to learn, and not hostages to a required class or a prerequisite for something, or even an elective that they had to take for a degree. But it is also a lot of hard work, so don't get the idea that it's just fun. It's not. So I want to just go through a few things about that you would want to know before you dive into this. So I hear this a lot. And it's like one of those myths. If you plan on taking an online course that you've taught, it's kind of like when instructors say, well, I've taught this class face-to-face for 20 years. I'm sure I can convert it to an online class with no work whatsoever. Right? And anyone who's taught online goes, yeah, right. Well, it's actually the same transition going from a SPOC to a MOOC. If you think to yourself, I won't have to change a thing, yeah, you're in for a big surprise. So let's talk about that surprise and how you can kind of prepare for it. So I would say that it's not just a paradigm shift you go through to teach a MOOC, it's actually a whole bunch of different paradigm shifts, and I'm going to kind of go through those in categories. So teaching a SPOC is like being the head of a local neighborhood association. You have to mediate some fights between neighbors, and like what color can houses be, and you set deadlines for certain things, and it's not so. It's not like a MOOC. In a MOOC, you're kind of like managing a small city, and now you have airports and you have air traffic coming in, parades march through the center of town, totally out of your control. People have staged protests and very public manners if you're not careful. So it is a very different experience, and I liken it to the difference between managing a neighborhood and managing a city. So if you can think about the headaches that multiply there, that's about what it's like. So I want to start by talking about the difference in students, because certainly if we don't talk about the difference in students, I think that's a problem, because they are very, very different. So I'll go through these 6 areas one by one, and we'll look at each of them. So first, the level of education. If you've followed any of the research about MOOCs, you know that MOOC students tend to be well educated. The vast majority already have college degrees. It's very different than what you're used to if you teach at the college level normally. The primary language is typically English, but you do have a lot more people who speak English as a secondary language than a primary language. And certainly the location is every time zone in the world. So a lot of people start their MOOC planning by having set deadlines, and it doesn't matter what time you set, it will be bad for some people in the world. And so you have to think about things like rotating deadlines so that every deadline's a different time and it's fair to everybody, and things like that. The students definitely are there for way different reasons than you're used to in college. You don't realize how much college students are hostages until you teach a MOOC, and you experience the opposite side of things. And the students are there because they want to be there. There's something they learn. Sometimes there's 2 weeks of the content they want to learn. Sometimes it's the whole class they want to learn. Sometimes they want to be part of a community. Everybody's got different reasons for being there. But one of the hardest things for people to get used to as a MOOC instructor is the fact that there will be people in the class who know way more about the topic than you do, because they're all the other educators who signed up, right? And I have a theory about MOOCs. I hope I have enough time to say this, but I have a theory that it's actually the same 100,000 educators moving from class to class and not finishing. So anyways, you have to know when you walk in to teach a MOOC that you are just the community leader and not the expert. Very few of us could teach a MOOC and be the world expert on it. And if you go in with the attitude, I think we're all very used to walking into our classes on a college campus and being the expert, right? We've had a lot of education and experience. We go to conferences. In a MOOC world, it's completely different. So you really want to befriend your students, figure out who knows just as much as you, start assigning them to discussion boards to monitor them, right? Then you don't have as much work to do. Students who take MOOCs tend to want a way less time commitment than what we're used to teaching college. I taught 15-week courses, 8-week courses, but a 15-week course was typically 3 to 5 sitting hours, and then double that for study hours, so you're looking at like 10 to 15 hours a week of work. MOOC students want to spend 2 to 4 hours a week. And how long do they want to spend it for? 4 weeks or so. So you cannot take your traditional class in the traditional length with all the material that's there and expect to somehow magically deliver it to MOOC students and have it be successful without changing things. Okay. And then this is a really important one, especially because conference access to resources. These students do not have access to scholarly libraries for the most part. or scholarly journals, so don't expect to assign something that they need to go to their local university and look up. As a guest to a university, it typically takes me an hour and a half to get signed in somewhere where I can actually access scholarly journals because of all the guest login errors and things like that you have to go through. So having open access to materials, and I'm not just talking textbooks, I'm talking research articles and things like that, is super important. I find it ironic that education teaches us to use so many scholarly articles and then kicks us out into a world where there are no access to that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting lesson in teaching and learning yourself what is a good vetted resource that is publicly available. And then thinking about things like, well, if I assign New York Times articles, after a certain number of articles, what happens? A paywall. So you have to kind of figure out what, and that can happen in the middle of your class too. The paywall goes up suddenly. So you have to be a little careful about what you assign and have enough variety that if in some places some resources are blocked, there are other resources to look at. I think that's a good way to kind of solve the problem. So then looking at SPOCs versus MOOCs in terms of learning, I'll go through a couple of things here that make the biggest difference in these. So when I taught my social media course as a SPOC, it was 4 credit, it was a small class, it was web enhanced, it was team taught, and we had access to a library, so like everything was different. And then I went into the MOOC world, and it was not for credit. It was 2,200 students, I think. It was fully online. I was the one teacher teaching the class, and we used all open resources. So it was quite a bit different than the first experience. I do want to give you this link up here. The class is open, so you can actually go poke around in it if you'd like. You just need to write down this link at the top, so I'll leave it up there for a second in case you want it. I'll read it for those of you in the back. It's learn.canvas.net/courses/1. You only get to be the first course if you were the one. So anyways, it's easy to remember. And so you can actually go and poke around in there. You will hit blocks every once in a while when you get to things like discussion boards because that's considered private student information. But in terms of browsing all the resources and the organization, you can see all of that. Everybody got it? Okay. I'll put it up again at the end in case you missed a letter or something somewhere. Okay, so in terms of designing a MOOC, wherever possible, I would provide resources that are freely accessible everywhere in the world. There is no way to cover 100% of the bases. For example, YouTube videos are great for most of the world, but blocked in a few countries. And there's not much you can do about that. You can try to, if it's a huge initiative and you have the funding and the resources, you can try to like send CDs with the videos on them or things like that. But again, I would suggest having a variety of resources, some of which will be accessible in every place, and some of which might not be, but that's okay. And wherever possible, let people contribute to those resources and you'll just have better collection. Consider yourself to be a curator of those things. I don't know if you've noticed lately, but it's not so easy to do a Google search and actually find what you want anymore. There's a lot of junk clogging the internet now, and so you're the expert at deciding what's the good stuff to read, so take that role on, and what's the good stuff to watch and share, good questions to ask. So this is just an example page from my course. You can see that this is all stuff that's delivered so that all students can see it. So links to articles, have a read icon, videos with a play icon, etc. And like I said, you can go browse that at your leisure. 25 minutes. I'm talking fast. Sorry. Okay. Assessments should be, I think, very low stakes, and wherever possible, provide an opportunity to learn. The job is not to actually assess, because the students are there to learn, and if they don't want to learn, where do they go? Away. Okay? So they self-assess. If they get tired and don't want to do it anymore, that's it. You do not have to keep assessing them. That's one of the really hard paradigm shifts if you've taught online before, because you're so used to assessing every detail to death to make sure it's that student in that seat actually doing the work. It no longer matters. Okay? So you don't have to create assessments just for the sake of creating assessments. You create assessments because they're good learning strategies. Okay? So for example, I created a quiz about Facebook. I need people to actually go read the fine print on Facebook, which, how many people have read the fine print on Facebook? Yeah, that's about right. 1, okay? So what I did so these were all the links to the fine print that they needed to read, which I was sure they would all skip. So I created a quiz, so you think you know Facebook. And it drew from a pile of about 20 questions, and each question was pretty much designed to trip them up. If you didn't read the fine print, you would never know the answer to it. And so with every question that they got wrong, they were kind of driven back to go read something. And of course, since it pulled from 10 questions from a pool of 20, the next time they got the quiz, they got new questions, and they would have to just keep going to read until they could answer them all. Right? What do they get for getting all the quiz right? A check mark. And yet that seemed to be enough motivation for most of them to go ahead and do that. Right? But so the point is that the assessment is there to actually drive the learning, not to assess the learning afterwards. I'm fully aware that nobody reads things anymore, so let's just drive them to the things instead. Right? So it's kind of like backwards pedagogy. I think the activities should, wherever possible, provide a chance to learn in the real world. I think this is super important in MOOCs. And if you can, create a way for people to share what they're learning with their friends or their family members and things like that. I think that also improves learning to a great extent. So some examples of that, one activity in our class was to get 50 followers on Twitter, or 50 more if you already had some, which actually turns out to be quite difficult. And so they had to start to share what was working for them and not working for them and what strategies they were employing and things like that. And so in the process of doing this activity, they created networks, they shared with friends, you know, all sorts of things that were important to them. And what they got at the end of this was a real-world social network, right? Way more important than me having them write a paper, which I wasn't going to grade, on like how do you get followers on Twitter or something like that. Right? This is a valuable artifact for the students. So anytime you can do something like that, that's great. Do I have to assess whether they did it? No, because it's a MOOC, right? I don't have to have them write a paper. I don't have to validate that everybody did it, right? I actually just, there was a discussion forum, they could talk about it. But actually at some point, I just had a little one-question survey that said, you know, which activity did you complete? As a new Twitter user, I got 50 followers, check the box. Right? So they could actually get a check mark for whichever thing they completed, but it was just a check mark, and check marks are check marks, right? And what was surprising was how many people would email me and say, can you extend the deadline on this? I haven't gotten it yet. So even though they could have just checked it, they didn't. I'm sure some people did, but again, no high stakes here. They're the learners, they decide. If they want to lie about their learning, that's their business, right? I think, well, let me say to be fair, if you're giving away certificates or credit or things like that, everything changes. I think credit, for credit, can actually probably ruin MOOCs, we'll see. I suspect MOOCs will get smaller and smaller and smaller, become SPOCs, and then we'll just have for credit, but that's another story. Okay, discussions were a really interesting place in a MOOC to really leverage the diversity of the participants. I think if you don't take advantage of this in a MOOC, that would be a big mistake. You have this opportunity to have the entire world teach you what they know and share with the other students in the class in terms of age and ethnic diversity and life experiences and socioeconomic status and the whole 9 yards. All right, this is a playground that students will never see again for this type of topic. I think that discussions do not have to be required in MOOCs. We get very used to requiring them in online classes. We do things like post once, reply 3 times. Okay, sorry, I've had a cold. So we shouldn't be requiring things unless there is a good reason. And so I want to actually, one of the things that teaching a MOOC taught me was that we should actually be more careful to distinguish between the types of discussions we see in both SPOCs and MOOCs. All discussion is not created equal. Discussion has very different meanings for us. So I'm going to go through 4 types of discussions I think that you can use in MOOCs and in regular classes. I think you should be very mindful of what you're doing. So the first type is a help forum. A help forum is there to provide help. Nobody should be required to post in it. But you do need places for people to post their questions. And the more organized your places are, the easier it is for people to find the questions when they're starting out, right? So help forum is for not just on using the technology, but like I have trouble with a question or whatnot. And the key with the help forum that makes it really different than other kinds of discussion forums is that once the question has been answered, what happens? You're pretty much done except for thank yous that follow, right? Or thumbs ups or something depending on the platform. And so you should never expect a help forum to function as anything more than what it is. It's a help forum. And so don't expect it to be something it's not. The next type of forum is a showcase forum. And this is the one type of forum I would say is maybe the one you would require because you're asking a student to showcase something. The URL for a great website, or how they would implement something. Or in my class, it was their social media goals. Everybody had to set their own social media goals. So they had to showcase that, and that was a required activity, required in that they got a check mark for doing it. And they couldn't see anybody else's until they posted theirs. And then once they went through each other's, they would sometimes alter theirs and things like that. But the reason it was required was because it was a valuable activity for everybody to reflect on their own goals. And sometimes in discussion forums, we have these things. This is the only kind of place where I could see doing something like post once and then reply twice. But even then, I think it's still a little contrived. Okay? So if it's a showcase forum, just call it out as that and make it that way. Okay? The next type of forum is the one we all aspire to have, which is the conversation forum. And especially in a MOOC, you should not expect that all students participate in all conversations. It's just not interesting. Imagine going to a dinner party and being required to participate in every conversation that's happening in the room before you leave. That's not the way it works in real life. You participate in the conversations that are interesting to you. So I think, especially in MOOCs, when you set up conversation forums, you pick topics of interest, you throw them out there. Some people will engage, some people won't. Don't worry about it. The more I taught this class, the more I realized that things I had been doing in my online class were too contrived. That I should have just done the same type of thing in my online classes and said, well, over the course of the semester, you need to participate X number of times total. You choose which ones you want to participate in. And that would have created much more natural conversations and a lot less me-tooing than you've seen it. You learn very quickly you don't want to create me-too experiences in a MOOC because nobody wants to read 1,000 me-toos. Right? So you try wherever possible to keep the conversation interesting by not forcing it and letting the people who have something interesting to say it. Okay? The last type of discussion I would just say is in real life sharing. Like we integrated in Twitter and Facebook and places where what they shared might also be seen by their friends and family and social networks and things like that, which I think makes the experience more interesting because people start to ask them about it, they talk about it more, they kind of create a local network that's in real life. Okay, I think I already talked about the length of the course, but what I do want to say is that just because a course is short does not mean it's not rigorous. Okay, it's just different. So one of the things I tell people about MOOCs is this is like the prime opportunity to take your best instructors and let them teach that topic area they always wish they had more time for. So let's say you're teaching freshman biology and you have a 2-week unit on genetics, but what you'd really like to talk about for 4 weeks is genetic engineering, but you have no courses on that. Well, then take that professor, let them teach a course on genetic engineering as a MOOC for 4 weeks. There are students from the class that are interested can enroll. People from all over the world can enroll. The professor's happy. The students are happy. You've got this new thing that you could never have gotten accredited or transferred, but it's still like a passion of the people that are at your college, right? And certainly you could do something like this with updating courses. So it's freshman biology. Well, every year there's new advances in biology, which get incorporated into the class. Offer a MOOC on advances in biology for all your alumni, or something like that, right? There are plenty of 4-week courses you can teach that are awesome and rigorous. They're just not 15-week courses. It's okay, right? Do it. Okay, so what's it really like to teach a MOOC? It's not as crazy as it may first seem. It's really rewarding, especially if you do it right. You will learn a lot about the way you want to teach your normal classes. Hopefully you will not decide you never want to teach a normal class again, but it's possible, just be aware. It's happened to other people too. But you will learn a ton about your own subject area, more than you ever thought you could. It was fantastic having students from other countries give me examples of how social media was used in their country. Even if you didn't understand the language of the videos and things they shared, you could totally understand why it had become viral and what about it was interesting, and they would translate the language for you and things like that. It was really quite fun. So it's kind of a crazy kind of fun. I don't know if you can see the word social media in there, but it is in there. So I would encourage you to be involved in a course. If you're not going to teach it yourself, find a good reason to do it on your campus. I think it's a really valuable experience. It could be great for alumni connections and things like that in a way that it's not really being utilized as now. So I'm going to leave it right there. Again, there's a link to the course at the bottom. How you reach me up there. I do not have business cards, so again, write it down if you want it. And that's it. I have 2 minutes for questions. We'll see. Do I have 2 minutes for questions?
1 minute.
1 minute. Are there any questions? Yes?
What does teaching a MOOC do to your email inbox?
It depends on how you set the course up. If you set up enough help forums, and you really drive students to them right away, like I made course tour videos, made sure to explain to students exactly where the questions went, things like that, it was not actually bad. It was way less than I thought it would be. Teaching it as Spock was worse. Yeah.
And I wanted to piggyback on that. Hi, this is Storm. You helped me
Yeah.
get my MOOC
Yes.
campus. You helped me automate it.
Yes.
And so it wasn't overwhelming at all as far as the email. Like you said, it was less than a spot. My question is a little different though. I wanted to know, I've been checking, I'm on a MOOC that's on campus right now. So I keep checking that front page. And I noticed they're starting to charge now. I even saw a couple that were $200. Is that a fair enough shift on Forest Canvas or the instructors?
Well, I don't work at Canvas anymore, so I can't talk for Canvas.
Okay.
But I don't think it's unlikely that MOOCs will have to start making money soon. People have sunk, and this is actually, people have sunk way more money into platforms like Coursera and Udacity than they have into something like Canvas Network, which is kind of a side project at Canvas, I think. But it's not unreasonable that those venture capitalists will eventually want their money, right? And it's kind of like Twitter not having a real good idea of what their revenue stream is. At some point, these companies cannot continue to make no money. And so I don't think it's unreasonable for them to start coming up with ways to charge. For the record, I think they're all wrong on how they're doing it so far. But nobody asks me, so how would I do it? I would go after alumni, especially. What I described with the biology course? Everybody wants to tie their alumni to their colleges more. How many people in this room would pay, if you had had the opportunity when you graduated, would have paid $20 a year to keep up in your subject area? Look at that, right? You are well-educated adults who have checkbooks and are willing to drop $5 on things like lattes or hot chocolates or things like that. $20 isn't going to make you blink, especially if it means you could have some of the same professors you had in college keep you up to date in your field. Right? Those same professors are already preparing the classes. If you just give them a release credit or two to take that same stuff they're preparing that's new and move it into a 4-week MOOC, this college could offer that class, charge $20 a pop to all alumni, anybody else who wants to take the class. Seems like a pretty easy business model to me. Start doing the math, $20 times 10,000 students. You can pay the platform, you can pay the teacher, the college can take some, everybody's happy with it, right? This does not seem like rocket science, but I think going after remedial students is probably not the best plan, which is what I've seen happen in a lot of cases. They need something different, not MOOCs, something different. You can look up the company I work for now and figure that one out. Any other questions? I think we're out of time. The next person needs to get set up. So I'll be out in the hall if you have more.